My grandmother, they were very poor over in Italy. My mother would say that for Christmas they'd only have one ice cream, and that was their treat, was one ice cream, and if she ever had a doll, that was a real treat. And they'd have to walk 3 or 4 miles to get wood for the fire, and they were 5, 6, 7 years old doing this. It was a very hard life over in Italy, so they came here for, better opportunity.
Before 1860, the south of Italy didn't know what immigration was. Southern Italy was a very resourceful state. It was called the Regno delle Due Sicilie, the Reign of Two Sicilies. The whole state had, at that time, 440 million liras circulating, while the rest of Italy had only 118 million liras. That gave the opportunity to the Savoy state, which is in the north of Italy, Piemonte, to invade Italy, which they did in 1860 with the pretense to take over what resource south of Italy had. So they did that in 10 years of time. With that formal declaration of war, the farmers, they revolted against it, and they were labeled as criminals, outlaws, but they're not. They were fined for a reason. They were fined for the right to their land that they were working for so many years, which the way the laws were written, they could never buy or own it. When they took over, they were promised that the land would be divided among them and the landlords. This did not happen as they promised. So the taxes at that time were doubled up. They put more taxes on the Southerns. So they were forced to leave the country. From 1861 to 1900, nearly 6 million people left what was the Regno delle Due Sicilie, the two southern states. They used 210,000 trained military personnel. They burned 154 villages, committed rapes, killed people for no reason. After that, deportation started. The ones that didn't get killed, they were deported out of the country, in France, in an island, or to the infamous Fenestrelli prison, which is located in north of Italy on the mountains, 2,000 meters above sea level altitude. Most of the people died within 6 months because they were not used to that kind of frigid, cold weather, being from the south. On my mother's side, my great-grandfather, they killed them. Once the civil war per se was over in Italy, the new state of Piemonte, the Savoy, began to dismantle all the factories in Italy. They were dismantled and brought to northern Italy, where they set up. Most of them were in exile. But as time went by, they realized that 69 people out of 100 will bring their family with them. That meant that those guys will never see Italy again, these people will never see Italy again. That's how immigration, as a mass, as families started.
They traversed this huge Atlantic Ocean with their hope of a better life. It wasn't guaranteed. There was a lot of uncertainty that they were going to a new place, a foreign land. There wasn't a lot that they knew about the place, except that they could make a better life there potentially if they worked hard, if they persevered, and if they really focused on what they did best, which was, I guess, work and family.
They were an extremely courageous group of people who came here with the idea of assimilating into a new society, and they were all very successful in doing that. They came with nothing. They didn't speak the language. They fought for everything they had, but they lived their life, and they infused their values in their children really to the highest degree.
My grandfather left there because life was pretty hard on the farm. A lot of the equipment was broken. It just wasn't working. He thought things would be better in America, and it was. And I think he went back only one time. I asked my dad if my grandfather ever went back, and he said just one time about 12 years later, and he was just really a little bit disappointed because everything that was broke, all the farm equipment that was broke when he left, was still broken.
My grandfather came here in 1890. He came here before Ellis Island actually was opened.
My grandfather, Dominic Chiappetta, came to Greenwich in 1891, 2 years before Ellis Island opened. He came through the Castle Garden in New York.
Quote, it was the land of opportunity, so he came here to work.
My father came over with his father. He went back in 1903, came back in 1904, brought his brother with him, then came back 4 or 5 years later, brought another brother, then his sisters came, you know, and then finally he went and he came back with his wife.
My dad came to Ellis Island in 1914, and my mother arrived in 1920. Through a few of his associates, he was able to find work. He wrote to my mother that she could come. So the passage was for December the 1st, 1920. He made all the arrangements for her to arrive at Ellis Island. In the meantime, if you weren't churched or married, you couldn't live with a woman or a man. And being devout Catholics as they were, they had to get married when my mom got off the boat. They went and bought a gown and the shoes and all the amenities that go with getting married. Well, they got married in 10 Carlton Street in New York City, which was the closest church to Ellis Island. So after they married, they came back to Greenwich, and they settled in Davis Avenue. My father had found an apartment that they could live in. It was close to town, so they could walk to central Greenwich and buy whatever they need. We were fortunate enough, there were 2 little grocery stores within 300 feet of each other. So they became good friends with the owners and the butchers, and they both spoke Italian, so it was an advantage for my mother.
My husband's grandfather was the first to come to this country, and he joined his brother-in-law who was already here. He came alone and left his wife and newborn baby back in Rose, Italy, Cosenza. 13 years later, he finally called for his wife and son to come to this country. So they set off alone from Rose, Italy to come to the United States and arrived at Ellis Island on Christmas Day, 1909. But the papers were incorrect and they would not release them from Ellis Island. His grandmother was afraid to let his father sleep in the men's dormitory. At Ellis Island, they had to be separated. Women in one dormitory, men in the other. So because she was afraid to let him go alone there, she decided to dress him as a woman. She parted his hair in the middle, put a kerchief on his head, and put her nightgown on him and let him sleep with her in the women's dormitory. He said that he had a ball at Ellis Island during the day. He wandered all over, knew every bit of the island. His grandfather was working for an estate here in Hillcrest Park in Greenwich, and they arranged for his boss, Mr. Whitman, to go down to the boat, straighten out the paperwork, saying that he had lodging for them. They were going to live on his estate with his father, who he did not know at all. He was 13 at the time. So they were able to be released on New Year's Day. He did not know English at all, didn't know how to read or write English, so he went to school in the North Mianus Elementary School and learned English, decided that he wanted to learn a trade. He became a plumber and learned plumbing and heating, and eventually got his master plumber's license and opened his own business by the name of Riverside Plumbing and Heating here in Greenwich, and was in business for 54 years in this area and probably knows every pipe. He did a lot with the building of Greenwich.
My dad came over and with my 2 brothers, and then I came here with my sister, my older sister, and my younger brother, And then 3 years after us, my mom came. 11 years after me, the rest of the family came, like my brother and his wife and children, and my sister and her husband and 2 daughters. There was a total of 10 of them coming together, and they had to live with us, with me, my mom and dad, and my brother. So we were 14 people in 2 bedrooms.
When I came here, the first kids I met were Italians. So, I mean, because I couldn't speak English, so the first kids we met, they were, especially my street, Stanford, then I know people in Cascade, Greenwich, that we grew up in Italy, so we used to play soccer every Sunday afternoon.
And we came here in 1970, and then from there, it was really a little hard for us because, especially for myself, my brother was 15, I was 9 and a half, we didn't know 1 word of English. It's not like now where you actually will know. A lot of people have a second language, they all speak English when they come here. At that time, we didn't know 1 word.
If I would have came earlier, let's say when I was 4 or 5, I would remember nothing from Italy. Traditions, language. I'm happy I came when I was 12 because I know how to read, write, I know about music, soccer. So I'm happy I came when I was a little older.
But somehow we learned the English, we learned how to play baseball, we learned how to play football.
Because I know kids that came before me, and they don't know nothing about Italy, where we come from, about sports in Italy, sports, music, and so I'm happy I came when I was 12. But I was one of the last, how do you say, flow of immigrants, because after me, not too many people came to America from Italy. I mean, once in a while here and there, but 72, like, were the last flow of immigrants.
I grew up on Apache Place in Riverside, and I never realized until I got older that it was an immigrant settlement. And my grandmother's house, I discovered as I got older, I met a number of people that said, you know, I lived in your grandmother's house. And I said, how did you live in my grandmother's house? Well, they did temporarily until they bought their own house. So my grandparents were probably older than the others, and they were there first. My grandparents lived there their entire life. It was very small, and my parents lived downstairs, a typical immigrant family house. My grandparents on the next floor, and my brother and I had our bedrooms up in the 3rd floor, which was really an attic.
My mom insisted that we speak English. We could speak Italian and learned a lot of funny words, but we did speak Italian. You know, just as conversation, but that was not the main language. She insisted that we were Americans and we speak English.
Mom said, I am now here in America. I must learn to read and write English. There's many of them that still live in town that have been here almost that long don't speak English. But she had the desire to learn to read and write, and she did.
As soon as he could speak English and read the Constitution, he became a citizen of the United States. He loved this country, and he instilled a love for the United States of America in my brother and me, and we have it to this day.